Oh, hey there. Are we supposed to be doing another video today? Crap. Sorry about that. How do I explain the greatness that is Bungo Stray Dogs? This is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time now. Like, I'm talking about a few months worth of time. And I have been trying to take the time to really find a way to articulate it, because it's a really fun show when it comes to action, when it comes to the mysterious dynamics of Bungo Stray Dogs. But I feel like the elements and the overall aspect of Bungo Stray Dogs goes way deeper than that. In this video, we'll be discussing the other themes of Bungo Stray Dogs that makes it so cool and interesting to watch, as well as how Bungo Stray Dogs is an ode to classic literary artists within Japan as well as outside of Japan. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll understand what makes Bungo Stray Dogs so unique and so fun and interesting to watch in all its depths and intricacies involved in the story. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Animel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Mel, the host of this channel. And per usual, if you've been here for a while, let's go into the synopsis of what Bungo Stray Dogs is about before diving into the analysis. Bungo Stray Dogs is an action mystery anime with about 5 seasons and 1 movie, I believe, that you can watch on Crunchyroll. Bungo Stray Dogs mainly follows around this group or organization that's called the Armed Detective Agency. This armed detective agency is filled with individuals that have supernatural abilities, and what they do is basically help solve the crimes and mysteries and intervene in any dire situations like terrorist attacks within the city of Yokohama that the police or military force cannot handle. As you can tell by the description that I've just provided, you can expect a lot of action and perhaps some mystery just by the name of the organization, Armed Detective Agency. And beyond that, for what is the duration of 5 seasons, there is a primary antagonist and then other antagonists that you'll see along the way. But we are first introduced to Port Mafia, who is, I would say, the other side of the coin for the Armed Detective Agency. And when you first start out watching season 1, that's what you get. You know, you get the vibe or the impression that this is going to be another contrast of good versus evil. But as the episodes go on and they start to explain some of the backstories and origins of the characters both within Port Mafia and the Armed Detective Agency, you start to realize that it's not as black and white, and that the world is mostly gray within Bungo Stray Dogs, which I would say is very parallel to the world that we regularly live in. And this will take us into our first reasonings as to why Bungo Stray Dogs is such a beautiful work of art and a wonderful anime. Instead of exploring the dynamics of good versus evil and who will win out, it is more like a struggle of what people's moral compasses are and which one you align with more. The story of Bungo Stray Dogs does an exemplary job in diving into the different characters and what their moral compasses points towards. And this is what creates the real conflict within Bungo Stray Dogs. Because each and every character that they present to us, whether it's in the form of a protagonist or the form of an antagonist, seem to have something about their moral compass that doesn't make you hate all of them. To analyze the different conflicts within Bungo Stray Dogs and everyone's different moral compasses, we're going to analyze a few different characters for me to be able to demonstrate to you all or explain to you all properly the complexities of the storytelling and the characters presented to us in Bungo Stray Dogs. Atsushi is our main character that we mostly follow around within the story of Bungo Stray Dogs. He is brought up in an orphanage home where he has a history of being abused by his caretakers and the people within the orphanage. He was often very lonely. By the time he turned 18, they kicked him out of the orphanage home without much or any explanation. After being kicked out of the orphanage home, Atsushi one day discovers a man who is trying to unalive himself. This man is Dazai. Dazai is possibly one of the most fan-favorite characters, and we'll get into him in a moment. With meeting Dazai, he comes to fully understand why he was kicked out of the orphanage home, and that is due to the fact that he has a supernatural ability that he has no control over. But with the help of Dazai and the Armed Detective Agency that he joins by episode 2, he is able to slowly start to control that ability and contribute to the Armed Detective Agency. The explanation of his backstory is really important because within this orphanage home, he was almost looked at as like a demon child. And for this reason, Atsushi has a really strong moral compass. Most people that Atsushi comes across and sees that has endured very painful or hard pasts in situations like himself, he feels a need almost like to help them. A lot of these characters, as you watch the story, are characters like Lucy, Hyoka, and Sigma that spread across all 5 seasons, and each of these characters seem to have similar backstories in which they're part of these organizations that commit crimes, let's say that. And they felt like they had no choice but to be part of these organizations because they had nowhere else to go. Atsushi realized that while this approach was not the best approach, it felt like that's all that they were left with, and decides to try and help each and every one of these individuals. However, oftentimes the difficulty with Atsushi is that he has very little confidence in himself in helping others because he still has really low self-esteem in the first and in the earlier parts of Bungo Stray Dogs. So therefore he ends up chickening out a lot, even though he has an ability that is sought after within season 1 of Bungo Stray Dogs. So there's this complexity going on with his character, that he has these morals to help others, and he doesn't judge people by their past just due to his own past, but has a hard time in really overcoming a lot of his fears from being alone, obviously violent acts. He chooses to try and talk things through most times if he can, but if it does need to come down to combat, he will fight, but he doesn't choose or enjoy fighting alone, and often ends up having moments of inner conflict where he knows the right thing to do is to step in, but as a means of self-preservation, he may not do so immediately. And to see that the main character has so much complexity to him that sometimes you end up getting frustrated, but at the same time, you end up realizing that he has different human aspects to him. He can't just always be courageous and strong all the time, especially if he's our main character, and that he's able to have faults and flaws and make mistakes, which happen throughout the story of Bungo Stray Dogs. Earlier, I mentioned Dazai, another main character of Bungo Stray Dogs, whose moral compass is really askewed. When the story first opens up with Dazai trying to unalive himself and Atsushi meeting him, he is part of the armed detective agency. But I believe within the first season, they also explained that Dazai first started out as not the good guy, or part of a crime organization that is known as Port Mafia. So Dazai started his early years of adulthood or his teen years part of a crime organization where he killed many individuals and was known as one of the top mafia members. And a lot of his reasoning for being part of Port Mafia and committing all these heinous crimes is the fact that when we are introduced to him and as we start to learn more about him, Dazai has never felt this connection to life. He's always felt like there was no good reason to live. Port Mafia gave him purpose because there was this darkness that was always lurking inside him of him trying to unalive himself, and in realizing that, I guess he could take his violent thoughts and use them in a different way through Port Mafia, he becomes a really heinous, violent individual. But due to certain events that I will not explain, so you just watch the series yourself, he decides to turn over a new leaf and use his abilities to work for the Armed Detective Agency. But even in working with the Armed Detective Agency, he still is trying to unalive himself as he still doesn't see his reasoning for living, even though his new reason for living is helping others and saving other people. And it is not until he meets Atsushi that he starts to see some of the values of life through Atsushi's eyes, because Atsushi really values life as indicated in describing some of his story and his moral compass and ideologies. He sees that people can be and should be forgiven for their past, especially if they're willing to. And while Dazai definitely chose to be part of Port Mafia on his own volition, he also did choose to be part of the Armed Detective Agency as he eventually saw that he could contribute to good and he could find meaning in helping others in his life. But even though he works for the Armed Detective Agency and is not actively trying to unalive himself at the later points of the story, there is still some ambiguity to his character. And he's a very mysterious character that's not always willing to reveal his hand, reveal his plans, and is very, very secretive. And it almost feels like Dazai is a character that almost demonstrates that people that have lived life a different way and decided to turn over a new leaf can still go back and forth between what they think is morally just or correct. And I feel like that's probably what's happening and what's going on with Dazai's character, even though it's not always explicitly explained. Another character that's often seen and part of a lot of the stories within Bungo Stray Dog is Kunikida. Kunikida is part of the armed detective agency, and he is probably one of the most morally righteous characters within Bungo Stray Dogs. This is really interesting because he feels like the embodiment of right or just or goodness, and seems to embody some of the aspects that Atsushi does, where if they could resolve things through discussion without conflict, that would be the best approach. And Kunikida really feels like if there's conflict, that no death needs to occur for a situation to be resolved. Kunikida is what you would call idealism to some extent when you are watching this show. It starts off as really righteous and you feel like, yeah, he's a good dude. But as the story goes on, you start to realize that a lot of what he believes is really idealistic. And in the world of Bungo Stray Dogs that has this gray ambiguity to it because things are not black and white, you see Kunikida struggle many times. And because of this, at one point within the story, he has to make a decision that he's not willing to make because it will come at the cost of people's lives. And unfortunately, it does cost the lives of people, where he starts to even question whether his beliefs have any weight to it. And what's interesting about his character is that his ability is connected to this notebook that he carries around, where he also holds all of his beliefs and his idealistic thoughts. And there's a beautiful symbolism in the story as to when that notebook gets cut in half and you kind of question as to whether he can still use his ability just due to the fact that they're connected to each other. And there's this interesting symbolism that happens within the story where when Kunikida is struggling with these beliefs and when this event happens, I don't know if it's when this specific event happens or at another point in the story, perhaps after when this event happens, his notebook gets cut in half, almost to say like, your idealistic thoughts cannot hold weight in this world that is not black and white, and that you may and have to make a choice along the way that won't sit well with you because this is the way of the world. And we do see Kunikida bounce back from these instances in which he does struggle between idealism and realism now, and what is actually practical in applying to these real world situations. And I would say Kunikida is definitely one of the more interesting characters because a lot of people have a lot of idealistic thoughts and beliefs. And these thoughts and beliefs come without experience or without firsthand real world knowledge to say that these beliefs can be applied. And while in the world we would love to see things in a more idealistic state, things are not black and white. And I think that's the theme that you'll hear throughout this entire video. I feel like we should start a game as to how often I say black and white, murky, or gray. But Kunikida is a character that basically helps the audience realize that there needs to be like an amendment between like idealism and realism to come to like real terms and solutions, even if we don't always love the solution. The characters that I've mentioned so far are all part of the armed detective agency, but it wouldn't be fair if I didn't also highlight some of the characters that are deemed antagonists within the story of Bungo Stray Dogs. Akutagawa is like the other side of the coin for Atsushi. He grew up extremely impoverished, almost starving to death every day, and having to fend for himself in the most idealistic ways. Because of this, Akutagawa basically grew up in a life of crime, as the only way for him to save himself was to steal, rob, and kill. Steal and rob are the same thing, sorry. And due to the fact that he grew up in this survivalist type of environment, where it's either you kill or you are killed, he sees the world very black and white. And when he joins Port Mafia, he continues to see the world this way, and that's what creates the biggest conflict between him and Atsushi. Because while Atsushi does see that people's backgrounds don't define who they are and they can change, Akutagawa definitely does not see that. And since Dazai used to be part of Port Mafia, Akutagawa basically idolizes him and doesn't understand why he moved over to the armed detective agency. So it's kind of like his mission to basically bring Dazai back to Port Mafia. And because Dazai used to kind of be this really violent top brass mafia member, Akutagawa is also looking for some sense of acknowledgement from Dazai. And because Atsushi becomes Dazai's apprentice within the armed detective agency, there is this one, jealousy from Akutagawa due to his fondness for Dazai, and two, as I mentioned, Atsushi, while having great supernatural abilities that are really powerful and sought after, is a bit of a coward and has a hard time like fighting. And because of this, Akutagawa deems him like kind of as a coward and undeserving of Dazai's attention, which makes Akutagawa hate him so much more. So even though Atsushi actually tries to make connections with Akutagawa and understand his background and just the hard life that he's lived that led him to working for Port Mafia, Akutagawa refuses to work with him. At times that all of Yokohama is in danger and involves Port Mafia and the Armed Detective Agency coming together to prevent terrorist attacks or large-scale disasters. But the beautiful thing about Akutagawa and Atsushi's situations is that they both end up improving each other throughout the storyline. And while they're both, I guess you could say, stubborn in their ways, where you can see that the way that I've described both of their characters are still rootly ingrained in them, you do see them change. And they are one of the best pairings within Bungo Stray Dogs whenever they do come together and whenever you do look at their characters a little bit more. And I'm sure if you have seen Bungo Stray Dogs, there is much more to their relationship as we see the story expand, but I haven't prepped enough time to talk about that. But if you would like to hear more about the dynamics between some of these Bungo Stray Dog characters, especially the characters between the Armed Detective Agency and Port Mafia, let me know in the comments below. And the last character that I want to highlight, because I feel like we still need one more antagonistic character that's not part of Port Mafia, is Fukuchi. Fukuchi is the antagonist of season 5. And season 5, I will just say that it probably is one of the best seasons that I've seen Bungo Stray Dogs put out. Action-wise, storytelling-wise, and just like the different moving storylines within Bungo Stray Dogs. Fukuchi is this man that starts off like, well, I guess you could say in a good place in the world. He's really good friends with the head of the Armed Detective Agency since their childhood. But at some point in their lives, Fukuchi and the head of the Armed Detective Agency, Fukuzawa, they kind of have like this splitting of ways where they both go to war, but how they came out of war really had a huge hand in where their moral compasses were placed. Fukuchi comes back from war determined to make sure that war never happens again. He starts a whole organization full of supernatural ability holders to essentially help with like terrorist attacks and things of that nature. However, it turns out that he had this underlying scheme this whole time while establishing this good or do-gooder organization. And that was basically to create like this one government system or this one like world or country system where you would never have to fight, I guess, amongst each other, even though there are civil wars. But if you had one governing entity, then people wouldn't feel the need to go to war with each other. And he felt like it's the ideologies and differences between these different governments and these different power holders that create war, and they create this destruction that ends up decimating societies. However, the way that he chooses to do it, though, is to basically start a nuclear war. In doing so, this would probably effectively decrease the population greatly. In decreasing the population greatly, it'd be easier to, consolidate everyone under one governing power. And again, we go down to the morality of Fukuchi. Obviously, the way that Fukuchi goes about this is definitely not the best way and definitely a heinous approach to eliminating war. And while the inherent goal was good or morally something that you could align with, because who likes war, this man is a great example of how someone can start off great and just end up going down the wrong path due to life experiences. And unlike some of the other characters on this list that had really hard pasts and upbringings, Fukuchi did not start off that way. So I would hope that this list of characters really helps you understand just how varying these characters can be, how the pasts of certain people will not define their futures, and how basically things can shift on a dime at any moment just because that's life. Nothing is black and white. Nothing is good or bad. There is always some moral aspect to how we align ourselves in our visions and our ideologies and thoughts in life that create conflict, which is what we are seeing amongst these characters and within these characters themselves. The character writing, the story writing, and the development and complexity of these characters makes Bungo Stray Dogs so enjoyable to watch outside of the action and the mystery involved with the show. The mangaka for Bungo Stray Dogs is quite possibly one of the most interestingly creative individuals that I guess I've seen within the story writing of like anime. While the story of Bungo Stray Dogs inherently is an action story with a lot of mysteries, there is like this interesting dynamic to each of the characters and the supernatural power system that is like, they call it like gifted abilities. And this is in connection to what I said earlier, which is Bungo Stray Dogs is an ode to like classic literary artists. If you're an avid fan of Bungo Stray Dogs, then you may have noticed right away that a lot of the characters are named after classic literary artists. But not only are they named after classic literary artists, but their abilities are also named after or referencing classic literary works by these artists. Osamu Dazai, one of the main characters of Bungo Stray Dogs, is a gifted ability holder of this ability called No Longer Human. No Longer Human actually references the same work named No Longer Human that was written by Osamu Dazai. And what I've realized is that while the ability references a classic literary work, the work itself, like if you look up the synopsis of the work, is actually used to help characterize these characters. So if you look up No Longer Human, not the specifics of the ability, but the classic literary work itself, you'll learn that the synopsis of No Longer Human is about a man who is basically ashamed of himself. He's an alcoholic, and he feels like he's not able to interact with other human beings. He sees himself as lesser than. And because of that, he views himself as no longer human, which is the name of the ability and the name of the work. Additionally, both the character within No Longer Human and Dazai's character within Bungo Stray Dogs, they both have detached themselves from life and other human beings since they don't see themselves as human or lesser than, which explains some of Dazai's like aloofness and playfulness and mysterious aspects to him. He doesn't really go out of his way to really build strong connections with people, maybe with the exception of Atsushi, but even there it's still a little bit murky due to some of the inner conflicts that he is having as a character morally. And aside from the connection between Dazai and the work, the actual literary work No Longer Human, both Dazai's, the character, and the real life author, both have this connection because, as we know, Dazai is always trying to unalive himself, when in reality and actuality, the author Osamu Dazai did unalive himself. So it's really interesting in how the literary works and the authors themselves helped create the characters that we see today on screen or within the manga of Bungo Stray Dogs. Some additional examples are like Atsushi. Atsushi's ability is known as Beast Under the Moonlight or Beast Beneath the Moonlight, which is a reference to Nakajima Atsushi's literary work, Moon Over the Mountain. While Atsushi's ability is not the exact title and name of Atsushi's literary works, if we look at the synopsis of the story of these works, you'll find out that it's a story of a man who could not accomplish being a successful literary author or writer and ends up turning into a tiger, which is Atsushi's ability. He's able to turn into a tiger or a hybrid of a tiger. And this is all due to the fact that he is, quote, from the lines of the book, a prideful coward and is shamelessly arrogant, which you could perhaps say is part of Atsushi's character. At times very cowardice, at times very arrogant about the fact that he wants to save people, has to save people because it's his duty. But when it comes down to the moment, there is that aspect of fear that I mentioned earlier that sometimes engulfs him. Everything is so intricately related between the literary works, the abilities of the characters, how the characters are named after the literary artists themselves, and how sometimes the literary artists and the characters also share these characteristics or actions that they do. Akutagawa's ability, Rashomon, is a reference to Rashomon, his actual literary work. And Rashomon is almost the embodiment of Akutagawa. It's about this man who is met with this conflict where if he doesn't steal or kill to survive, then he will die. Much like Akutagawa's vision of the world and how he grew up. And in the story, he effectively ends up going down a morally dark path because there was no other way for him to survive. And obviously it wasn't upon him that he ended up in this situation. Just like Akutagawa, he was but a child. But when faced with the choices he had in the world, he felt like there was only but one choice, and that was to kill and steal for the insurance of his life. So in a way, even though I've actually never really read some of the literature that I've talked about and described between these different characters, I feel like I, in turn, have learned through Bungo Stray Dogs about this literary work or these literary works and authors. If you want to know more, and perhaps if you want me to do a whole video on all of the characters within Bungo Stray Dogs, the literary works that they're attached to, and the literary artists that they're attached to, let me know down in the comments below. I feel like I couldn't jam all of it into one video. I just wanted to highlight all of the greatness that Bungo Stray Dogs has within, you know, a short time span. But I do see like perhaps the benefit in creating a full video on each and every character. Some more fun facts on the characters and how they relate to their real life authors is that Dazai is a great influence on Akutagawa within the Bungo Stray Dogs storyline. Akutagawa admires him greatly, he sees him and idolizes him, but in reality, between these two authors in real life, it's actually quite the reverse. Akutagawa's works ended up influencing what Dazai wrote later on when he became an author. And this is not the only situation in which, you know, the roles are reversed in the anime versus real life. Similar story on characters that I haven't mentioned are Rampo and Po, both references to the real authors Edogawa Rampo and Edgar Allan Poe, a name that you might be very familiar with. Since I haven't mentioned Rampo, let me give a quick intro onto his character. Rampo is part of the Armed Detective Agency, and he is known to be one of the greatest mystery solver detectives within the whole Bungo Stray Dogs universe. And Rampo is well known for writing detective boys mystery books. It's like a whole category, look it up. But in real life, it wasn't that Rampo influenced Poe, because Poe admires Rampo very much within the story of Bungo Stray Dogs, but the reverse. As you know, Edgar Allan Poe is very famous for writing dark and mysterious stories. And it was in turn that Edgar Allan Poe's writings that influenced Rampo to create all of these detective mystery novels within his time as an author. And I don't know if I need to mention this, but the power system or the supernatural gifted ability system within Bungo Stray Dogs, it's extremely creative, not just because they're named after real-life literary works in relation to all of the different characters, real-life authors. But I feel like the mangaka really had to think things through and stretch things out in a way so that things could still connect to like literature work, but still be really cool and dynamic, so that people who really enjoy watching action can be engaged in all of the battle that occurs within Bungo Stray Dogs. And since there is some aspect of mystery within Bungo Stray Dogs, you can always expect something unexpected to happen, and the show will always keep you on your toes. If you've never seen Bungo Stray Dogs before, hopefully this video piqued your interest to go check it out. And if you're an avid fan of Bungo Stray Dogs, hopefully I've been able to provide some new facts and information that you didn't know before. Wow, I feel really thirsty now after saying all of these things. And while this video may not be, you know, really long in comparison to other people that do really in-depth analysis videos, this quite possibly was the most research and reading and collecting of information that I've done on any type of video ever in the history of my channel. I feel like I put a lot of love and intention into this video, so I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. I love to know your thoughts around it, whether positive, neutral, or negative. It's really helpful so that I can continue to curate and create content that's interesting to you, the viewer. So yeah, let me know how you feel about this whole video in the comments below, or if you have any suggestions as to like what I mentioned earlier, if you have any more curiosities about Bungo Stray Dogs, I'm happy to create more content around it, because this video, while daunting, was very fun to create. However, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much for joining as usual. This is Mel, the host of AniMel. I will catch you all next time on another video. Not sure if it'll be next week or not, but it'll be another video. Bye!